One morning, without so much as a knock or a courtesy call, our HOA president, yes, her real name is Dolores Dubuiza, came storming across our yard like she owned the entire lake. She was shouting about rule violations, community expectations, and whatever else her clipboard had to offer that day. No hello, no introduction, just pure chaos. I was about ready to lose it. But before I could say a word, my wife Amelia calmly stepped forward, handed Dolores a single sheet of paper, and just like that, silence. Dolores froze mid-rant, completely still, from whirlwind to stone statue in seconds. I'm telling you, it was one of the craziest things I've ever witnessed. Got a similar experience? Share it in the comments. Ya Stories is always up for a wild hotel. Amelia and I had finally bought the home we'd been dreaming of for years. A sleek, modern cabin nestled on the lake shore, built from steel and glass. Every dime we'd saved went into the place. I'm 35, work from home as a freelance architect, and I've never been good at confrontation. I either clam up or say something I regret later. Amelia, on the other hand, she's 32, a county building inspector, and can glance at a support beam and tell you if it's code compliant. She's sharp, composed, and knows construction and property law better than most attorneys. Still, I've seen that calm snap to razor sharp when someone crosses a line. We thought we'd found our slice of heaven, a broken bar, until we met the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, HOA President Dolores Dubois. Looking back, I should have taken it as a warning when I noticed her eyeing our moving truck like she was planning a raid. Dolores was 55, a former real estate agent with a failed marriage and, apparently, a new passion project to micromanaging every inch of the neighborhood. Our neighbor Leo told me later that she'd once lost her dream home and now clung to HOA rules like they were life preservers, dragging everyone else down with her. She called it protecting community values, but to me, it felt more like a personal vendetta against Joy. She had this uncanny ability to make you feel like you'd dishonored her ancestors just by walking past her house. I didn't know whether to pity her or be furious, but the more I learned, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute. We'd moved into a battleground. Leo Rodriguez, who lived a few houses down, was a 60-year-old retired electronics engineer and the neighborhood's unofficial historian. The man thrived on gossip and knew every piece of drama like he was writing a memoir. Just days after we moved in, he wandered over while I was unloading boxes and gave me the first dose of reality. "You picked an interesting time to move in," he said with this sly smile that immediately unsettled me. "Dolores has been on a serious power trip lately. Just last month, she fined the Johnsons $500 because their kids drew chalk art on their driveway. On their own driveway. I couldn't believe it. Sidewalk chalk wasn't allowed. Was this some dystopian sitcom?" Leo just kept the stories coming. "See that sweet old man down the road? She dragged him into court over a 6-inch garden angel statue. Said it violated the neighborhood's religious inclusivity standards. Poor guy spent $3,000 in legal fees trying to keep the thing. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Suing an elderly man over a tiny statue. Who does that?" And Leo had more. "She made another family take down their American flag because the pole was 2 inches taller than the HOA allows. And don't get me started on the Martinses. She wrote them up because their porch light wasn't the A-approved shade of white." A week after moving in, we got our first official letter. I assumed it might be a welcome packet or maybe a calendar of local events. Instead, it was a typed list of violations sounding so formal I half expected a judge to appear at our door. According to Dolores and her self-appointed authority, our modern steel and glass design clashed with the neighborhood's preferred aesthetic. Our dock was supposedly installed in violation of waterfront guidelines. Even our outdoor lighting wasn't in harmony with the local visual tone. I reread the letter twice, trying to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. But no, this woman was dead serious about controlling architectural style like she was some kind of design overlord. We had put everything we had into that home, and she was complaining that it didn't blend in enough. My first instinct was to fire off an angry reply, draft a scorched earth email that'd make it clear we weren't going to be intimidated. But Amelia stopped me before I could even open the laptop. "Don't," she said. "People like her don't care about logic. They crave control. Let her play her little drama out first." Her voice was calm, But I saw the calculating spark in her eyes, the one that meant she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I felt helpless, watching Dolores throw her weight around while I stood frozen. Amelia, thought she didn't panic, she observed. I didn't know if she was just composed or secretly as anxious as I was. But one thing was certain, Dolores Dubois wasn't going to let us live in peace. Week after week, new letters arrived, each filled with more absurd accusations. Our deck extended too far over the water. Our minimalist outdoor furniture didn't suit the lakeside residential theme. Even our lighting fixtures were allegedly in breach of vague community values. Every envelope felt heavier than the last, like it carried a threat I couldn't quite identify. I didn't see it then, but in hindsight, it was clear. She was building a case. Piece by piece, she was assembling a paper trail, laying the groundwork for something bigger. Then came what I now refer to as the nuclear option. Dolores sent us a formal notice, typed, stamped, and dripping with bureaucratic menace, demanding that we correct all so-called serious community violations within 7 days. If we failed to comply, she stated she'd personally carry out a full inspection of our property and initiate appropriate enforcement measures. The tone was harsh and cold, as something you'd expect from a government agency right before they condemned your building. I stared at the paper, hands trembling with frustration, and seriously considered storming over to her house and unloading every word I'd held back since we moved in. Who did she think she was, threatening to inspect our private home like we were criminals? Amelia, thought a broken bar. She read it and gave the faintest smirk, but I saw her knuckles tighten slightly around the page. That same quiet, unreadable expression crossed her face again. Looks like she wants to escalate things, she said, voice calm but eyes sharp. I couldn't help wondering, were we completely out of our depth, or had Amelia already plotted a way through it all? Something about her composure told me she was already 5 moves ahead in whatever game Dolores thought she was playing. We made a conscious decision, no response to her threats. Not yet. Instead, I watched as Amelia dusted off her legal reference books and started making calls to contacts I didn't recognize. She'd vanish into her home office for hours, buried in case law, municipal codes, and HOA regulations. She took notes with the precision of someone building a legal battle plan. When I asked what she was up to, she just said, "Research, Daniel. The best defense is knowing exactly what you're up against." I didn't know what she was putting together, but the look in her eyes told me Dee had just made a critical error. While Amelia worked like she was prepping for a courtroom showdown, I decided to dig deeper into our self-declared home monarch. Naturally, I turned to Leo, our neighborhood's unofficial gossip columnist. He was more than happy to provide intel over coffee on his porch, clearly thrilled to have a fresh pair of ears. "You want the real story on Dolores?" he said, settling back in his chair with a grin. "I remember when she dragged that poor old man to court over his 6-inch guardian angel statue, said it didn't meet the community's religious diversity standards. Guy spent $3,000 defending the thing." Wait. Had he already told me that one? Still, Leo pressed on, seemingly with an endless supply of horror tales. "She fined the Johnsons $500 for chalk art their kids drew on their own driveway. Called it unsightly. And get these people have been whispering that she's not just reckless with power. She's reckless with the ho's money, too. Dues vanish into legal fees with no accountability, while the potholes in our streets keep multiplying." That's when it started to click for me. This wasn't just about our cabin. This was a pattern, a power trip. Dolores wasn't merely obsessed with rules, she was reckless, vindictive, and financially irresponsible. Looking back, I'm still stunned by how many red flags were waving in plain sight. But I guess when someone acts with authority, people assume they know what they're doing even when it's clear they're unhinged. Leo leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a national secret. "Between us, I think she gets a rush from control. People say it all started after her divorce, like she redirected all her bitterness at the rest of the neighborhood." Strangely, that made sense. In a twisted way, it explained her intensity. As Leo rambled on, I realized something chilling. We weren't her first targets, just the latest in a long list. He circled back to the guardian angel statue again, like it was the grand finale of her cruelty. I let him talk. Sometimes, people need to repeat themselves to process the madness they've witnessed. "There's more," he said, clearly enjoying his role as neighborhood historian. "Remember the Petersons? They had a vegetable garden. She claimed their tomatoes violated residential zoning and made them tear it all out." "Tomatoes?" Daniel, he wasn't finished. "And Mrs. Chen had wind chimes. Dolores claimed they created a noise disturbance even though you couldn't hear them from 10 feet away. She's got issues, and unfortunately, she's channeling all of them into HOA rules." Meanwhile, inside our house, Amelia was in full legal ops mode. She contacted Edward Blakey, a real estate lawyer she'd worked with at the county. I overheard them on conference calls, dissecting HOA bylaws and state housing codes like they were searching for a loophole that could save us. "Edward," she'd say, "run me through the latest amendments to property inspection statutes." She studied case law like scripture equal parts reverence and furia, while Edward outlined legal precedents so complex they made my head spin. I couldn't follow half of what they were discussing, but Amelia was relentless, focused. She didn't slow down for a second. And then, after several long nights with little sleep and endless legal documents, Amelia called me over to her desk. Her eyes were bright with adrenaline, exhausted, but triumphant. She flipped through a stack of printouts until she landed on the exact statute we needed. "Daniel," she said, her voice electric, "look at this. According to updated state regulations, an HOA cannot inspect private property without written homeowner consent or a valid order from the authorities." She looked up, her threats legally meaningless. "If she steps foot on our property without permission, it's a violation of our ownership rights." I had to read it twice just to believe it. This was the armor we didn't know we had. But I knew my wife. She wasn't going to just show Dolores the law and ask nicely for peace. She pulled out more documents from her neatly organized folders like a magician producing tricks from a hat. "Edward confirmed it," she continued. "There was a recent state law change passed specifically because of cases just like this. HOA overreach. Dolores either missed the memo, or she's banking on us being uninformed. Every notice, every threat, every violation she sent, nothing but smoke." But something told me Amelia was only getting started. I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Something about Amelia's voice told me she wasn't about to draft a polite email reminding Dee of property rights and call it done. No, this was bigger, much bigger, and I had a growing suspicion that my wife was orchestrating something far more strategic than I realized. "There's more," she said, spreading a collection of documents across her desk like a detective solving a cold case. "I've been digging into county records, and Dolores has filed formal complaints against 7 families in the last 2 years. Every single one led to expensive legal fights, and the kicker, the HOA covered the costs, which means we all paid for her crusades." That hit hard. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor with control issues. This was someone abusing her position to ruin lives and draining the community budget to do it. I stood there, hands trembling, anger and disbelief flooding my system. I wasn't pacing anymore, I was practically vibrating. "So, what now? Do we show her the law and hope she backs off?" Amelia shook her head with that quiet, knowing look she gives when she's 5 steps ahead. "No, Daniel, people like her don't respond to logic. They only respond when they face consequences. We wait for her to make her movie her real movie, and then we make sure it's the last one she ever gets." I wanted to feel relieved. We had legal ammunition, after all, but the way she said consequences made me pause. I should have asked what she meant, but, honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. That evening, Edward called. Amelia put him on speaker, and I listened from the couch, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "I've looked into the HOA's financial statements," Edward said. "There are some serious discrepancies. Funds that should have gone to maintenance and repairs were redirected almost entirely into legal expenses." He paused intentionally. "If someone wanted to escalate this to the county prosecutor, there might be a case worth investigating." His voice hung in the air like a storm cloud, and I turned to Amelia just in time to see that cool, focused expression reappear on her face. The one that always meant someone was about to have a very, very bad day. The rest of the night was spent sorting every piece of documentation Dolores had ever sent us. Emails, letters, notices, all carefully catalogued. Watching Amelia work was like watching an architect build a fortress. one carefully placed brick at a time. She was building something. I still didn't know exactly what. But one thing had become crystal clear. We weren't just going to defend ourselves from Dee's attacks. We were going to put an end to her reign entirely. Part of me was proud. Another part was terrified. Were we about to poke a dragon that could scorch everything we'd worked for? Then came Saturday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. I was still blurry-eyed in my pajamas, trying to decide if I needed caffeine or divine intervention, when I heard the slam of a car door just outside. It had that sharp, decisive sound like someone declaring war. Peering through the window, I spotted a sleek black SUV parked aggressively across the mouth of our driveway, blocking us in as if we were suspects under house arrest. Dolores had arrived. She climbed out in a stiff blazer, clipboard in hand, walking with the posture of someone who believed they had full dominion over the earth beneath their feet. Part of me wanted to laugh, the rest of me instinctively reached for the lock. She stomped across the lawn with the energy of a government agent preparing to confiscate contraband. No knock, no doorbell, no basic decency. She simply began shouting a full volume as she approached the house. This eyesore of a cabin is a violation of everything this neighborhood stands for. She yelled, her voice carrying over the lake like it was amplified through loudspeakers. I've received numerous complaints from residents, and I am here to personally document every single violation. Her voice echoed. I'm pretty sure most of the neighborhood heard Ida, which, knowing her, was exactly the point. My chest tightened, my hands curled into fists. Was she seriously about to force her way into our home? I started for the door, ready to unload all the fury I'd been holding in. But before I could even take a step, Amelia gently placed a hand on my arm. Her voice was low but firm. The louder she gets, the more damage she does to herself, she said. Let her perform. She's writing our victory for us. I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't know what Amelia was planning, but I knew enough to stay out of her way when she had that look in her eyes. Dolores reached the door with all the arrogance of someone who truly believed she had the right to enter anyone's home. Her grip tightened on the clipboard, her jaw set in righteous fury. This structure is a complete departure from neighborhood values, she announced loudly, as though delivering a verdict. The steel and glass design is wholly inappropriate. I am well within my rights to carry out a full inspection of this non-compliant property. She grabbed for the door handle like she fully intended to walk in and started taking photos. That's when Amelia rose from her chair, calmly walked to the door, and placed herself directly in Dolores's path. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She simply stood there like an immovable object. Excuse me, Mrs. Du Bois, Amelia said, her tone polite but edged like a scalpel. It was that voice she uses when she's about to dismantle someone's entire argument piece by piece. You have no legal authority to enter our home, not without written permission, not without a court order. None. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow her presence filled the entire entryway. And I saw, for the first time, a flicker of doubt pass across Dolores's face. Then, Dolores laughed, not a nervous laugh, a mocking one, as if Amelia had said something absurd. Dolores let out this ridiculous laugh, like Amelia had just told the greatest joke in history. It made my blood boil, partly because it was insulting, and partly because I felt the urge to jump in and defend my wife's legal credentials right then and there. I am the HOA president, she declared, puffing herself up like a cartoon villain. I have full authority to inspect this cabin and ensure it aligns with our community's standards. The arrogance was almost surreal. Did she genuinely believe her own delusions, or was this some elaborate bit of performance theater? Then Amelia, cool as ever, reached into her folder and pulled out a document embossed with an official red state seal. I saw Dolores's face start to change the second that seal caught the light. This is a statute, Amelia said evenly, detailing private property inspection limits under state law. She held the paper up, just close enough for Dolores to read, but not close enough for her to grab. If you attempt to proceed with an unauthorized inspection, I'll be required to initiate formal enforcement procedures. Her tone was still perfectly polite, but each word landed like a gavel. She wasn't angry. She was in total control, like a prosecutor delivering her closing argument in a case she knew she'd already won. I have all the required documentation prepped and ready to file with the proper agencies. I found myself holding my breath, This felt like watching a checkmate being played out in real time, yeah, except only one person at the table seemed to realize it was a game of chess. Dolores reached forward to snatch the paper, but Amelia subtly pulled it back, making her lunge like a child swiping at a cookie jar. When she finally got hold of it, her expression changed, her jaw tightened, and her fingers twitched slightly as she scanned the text. It only took seconds for her to realize this wasn't some bluff printed from a shady website. This was the real deal, legit government documentation, and it was obvious she didn't fully understand it, but recognized enough to know she was in trouble. I'll need to run this by our legal team," she stammered, suddenly unsure of her footing. She looked like someone who'd just been handed a live grenade and realized the pin was missing. She tried to recover, straightening up, holding on to whatever authority she thought she still had. "This doesn't change the fact that your home is in violation of several community aesthetic standards." Even her attempted comeback landed weak, like she was reading off a script she'd forgotten halfway through. Amelia just smiled, cool and collected. "Of course, Mrs. Du Bois. Please, take all the time you need to review Ida with qualified legal counsel." That last part, a qualified legal counselor, was a dagger wrapped in silk. She wasn't just pointing out Dee's overreach, she was making it obvious Dee had no idea what she was dealing with. "And just so we're clear," Amelia added, her voice still smooth, "any attempt to access this property without proper legal authority will constitute criminal trespass under state law." Dolores froze. For several long seconds, she didn't say a word. The woman who had stormed in shouting about community standards now looked like she'd rather melt into the grass. Then, without another word, she turned and walked stiffly back to her SUV, her confident strut replaced by a defeated shuffle. It was like watching a storm cloud retreat from the sky. But even as I watched her leave, relief didn't fully settle in. Something in my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. Instead of retreating, Dolores doubled down. That legal takedown must have bruised her ego, because what followed wasn't another formal complaint, it was a full-on psychological assault. Within days, she suspended our home member access, slapped us with a sudden dues increase, and labeled our home non-compliant, a completely made-up status she wielded like it had legal weight. I remember holding the letter in disbelief. Can she actually do this? But that was just the beginning. The city called us about a supposed visual blight complaint. Flyers started popping up around town accusing me of being a failed architect. My clients hesitated, some disappeared. Her attacks were strategic, precise. I had no concrete proof she was behind it all, but the timing made it obvious. I found myself driving around town, tearing those flyers off telephone poles, scraping my reputation off public bulletin boards like I was cleaning up after a smear campaign. You hear stories like this on linear wild tales about vindictive neighbors and outrageous HOA drama. It's funny when you're watching it on a Storytime channel or scrolling past it on social media. Living through it? Not so much. This wasn't some story I could laugh at and move on from. This was my career, my name, my peace of mind. And it was all unraveling, one carefully planted sabotage at a time. For a brief moment, I considered giving in. Maybe we should have just painted the window trim whatever color she wanted. Maybe we should have changed the light fixtures or removed the furniture she hated. Maybe it would have saved us all of this trouble. But then I realized that it's exactly what she wanted. To break us down until we caved. If we gave in now, we'd be just another checkbox on her conquest list. We started getting trash citations, anonymous complaints, mysterious phone calls at 2 a.m. Even our mailbox was labeled with a sticker that read non-compliant. And it didn't stop. I didn't handle it well. My calm unraveled. I started to spiral. Every slow-moving car that passed our house felt suspicious. Every unknown number that called made my pulse spike. Every stranger walking their dog felt like a plant. "She's trying to crush us," I told Amelia one night, pacing like a man losing his grip. "She's tearing us apart from every angle. She's using every dirty trick she can find to destroy us, and no one's stopping her." Looking back, I probably sounded unhinged, but in the moment, it felt like we were under siege. Through it all, Amelia remained unnervingly calm. In fact, her stillness made me angrier because I didn't understand how she wasn't panicking too. "Daniel," she said softly, "the more desperate she gets, the more evidence she leaves behind. Every move she makes now is one step closer to her downfall. Amelia was documenting everything. She had this manila folder that seemed to grow fatter by the day, stuffed with printouts, photos, and carefully categorized notes like she was building a case fit for federal court. Sometimes I'd catch snippets of her conversations with Edward, her voice laced with legal jargon I barely understood. Other times, she'd vanish for hours and return with more files, wearing the same calculating look that both comforted and unnerved me. Would you have stayed as composed as she was, or cracked under the pressure like I did? Because honestly, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Meanwhile, my wife treated the whole ordeal like a puzzle she was quietly enjoying solving. Then something unexpected started happening, something that reminded me we might not be as isolated as I'd feared. Neighbors began reaching out with their own horror stories about Dee. Apparently, what we were going through had become the latest buzz around the neighborhood. There was the family with the sidewalk chalk incident, the elderly man with the guardian angel statue. Even total strangers were suddenly sharing how they'd been targeted by our HOA president's absurd crusades. One evening, while I checked the mailbox for the third time that day, I'd become that paranoid. A woman I didn't recognize approached with a firm expression. "You're the couple with the modern cabin, right?" she asked. When I nodded, she continued, "I just want you to know, not everyone agrees with what Dee is doing. Some of us have been talking. We think it's time someone finally stood up to her. What she's doing to you is wrong, and it's not what this community stands for." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't alone in this after all. But the pressure didn't let up. In fact, it felt like it was growing slowly and relentlessly, like a leaking boat filling with water. We started getting anonymous complaints filed with the city about everything from our dock's placement to our exterior lighting to landscaping choices that had never been an issue before. It was obvious the complaints were nonsense, but each one required energy to deal with, dragging us deeper into exhaustion. Every phone call, every envelope in the mail brought the dread of a new headache. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It felt like a deliberate strategy to wear us down until we gave up and walked away. I started wondering how much longer we could realistically hold out. Were we just digging ourselves deeper into a mess we couldn't win? Every day we stayed and resisted, it felt like another shovel of dirt tossed on our backs. And yet, Amelia stayed steady. Behind the scenes, she was still working with Edward Blake on some larger plan she wouldn't explain. No matter how many times I asked, "Trust the process, Daniel," she'd tell me, "Some battles take time, and some opponents will hang themselves if you give them enough rope." I couldn't tell if her calm was brilliance or if we were walking straight into a disaster we couldn't recover from. Then, just as I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Amelia told me she'd been speaking with Sophia Ramirez. I nearly choked. "The what? You talked to Sophia?" I asked, not sure if she was joking, as in, Dee's shadow at every meeting. "Sophia? That Sophia?" Amelia gave me that serene, knowing look, the one that usually means she's been plotting something behind the scenes for weeks. Sometimes the people closest to a tyrant are the first to see who they really are, she said. Sophia's been keeping records, more thorough records than Dee realizes, and ones she'd definitely want to keep buried. Apparently, Amelia had begun collecting real evidence of Dee's abuse of power and financial misconduct through her contacts at the county building department. But earning Sophia's trust hadn't been fast or easy. When I first approached her, Amelia explained one night as she laid out papers across the kitchen table, she defended Dee without hesitation, said she was professional and only had the community's best interests at heart. But Amelia didn't argue. She simply started showing her the facts, carefully laid out proof of rule violations Dee herself had committed. Through weeks of meticulous research, cross-checking home meeting minutes with county records, Amelia uncovered something damning. Dee had been using HOA funds to hire personal attorneys to go after residents of multiple families, not just us. There was a pattern. Pick a family with a minor violation, escalate it unnecessarily, then funnel community money into a legal response designed solely to intimidate. "She's not protecting the neighborhood," Amelia said one evening, her voice sharp. "She's raiding it, treating HOA funds like her own private legal war chest." The first time Amelia sat down with Sophia, the woman was stiff, rehearsed, all business. But eventually, Something cracked. It was like watching someone step out of a prison they'd built for themselves. The tipping point came when Amelia presented her with evidence that Dee had ignored state regulations and worse, had created a trail of financial inconsistencies that could put the entire board in legal jeopardy. She threatened to ruin me if I spoke up, Sophia eventually confessed in a hushed voice during a quiet meeting at a coffee shop 20 minutes from our house. Her hands shook, her eyes darted. She was scared, and rightfully so. If someone threatened your job to keep you quiet about illegal activities, she asked, would you risk everything to speak out? That was the impossible choice Sophia had been living with. And honestly, I wasn't sure I would have had the courage to do what she was doing. I've been silent because I have to support my mom, she whispered. But I can't keep covering for her anymore. Sophia looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. She's not protecting this neighborhood a broken bar, she's dismantling Ida one family at a time. The courage it must have taken her to speak up, to betray someone she'd once supported so loyally, was extraordinary. Inside the documents she handed over were falsified financial records, lists of residents marked for retaliation, altered meeting notes, all meticulously annotated by Sophia. This wasn't just a power-hungry board president bullying her neighbors. Dee had crossed into criminal territory: embezzlement, document tampering, and employee intimidation. Funds meant for maintaining the neighborhood, improving landscaping, or fixing common facilities had been funneled into personal legal campaigns against any homeowner who dared to question her. There's more, Sophia said gravely, sliding a final folder across the table. What I saw inside made my stomach churn. My name and our name Meza were listed under a heading labeled Problem Families. There were notes about our home's design, strategy points for escalating violations, even timelines. This wasn't a conflict with a difficult neighbor. It was a calculated effort to push us out, piece by piece. But the most disturbing part came next. Sophia showed us minutes from home meetings only they'd been doctored after the fact to suit Dee's narrative. She rewrote what people said, then filed those edited transcripts as official records. So when residents later questioned decisions, Dee could wave around false proof and gaslight them into silence. It was astonishing. Not just that she manipulated power, but that she literally rewrote history to defend her lies. With Sophia's insider testimony and a mountain of documentation, Amelia finally had the ammunition she'd been patiently building toward for months. That night, after her last phone call, she turned to me with a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. Get ready, Daniel, she said. There's going to be a special emergency home meeting, and I have a feeling you're going to be very surprised by how it ends. I should have felt triumphant. We had the truth. We had the evidence, but the edge in Amelia's voice told me there was still more I didn't understand. The emergency meeting was set for Thursday evening at the community center. By 6:30, the room was overflowing. I saw faces I'd never seen before, not at any meeting, event, or neighborhood walk. The air buzzed like static, alive with tension and unspoken anticipation. People whispered in corners, cast suspicious glances, and tapped their phones like they were waiting for breaking news. It was impossible to tell who was on Dee's side and who was just there for the spectacle. My hands were sweating, my thoughts racing. This wasn't just about us anymore. It had become something much bigger. Before the meeting officially began, Dee made her move. She stood at the front, exuding smug confidence, and announced, I'm holding in my hand a petition signed by 15 concerned residents calling for the immediate removal of the Carter family from this community, citing repeated and serious violations that negatively impact property values. My heart dropped, not physically, but emotionally. It felt like the floor had given way beneath me. Was this it? Were we about to lose everything because a handful of signatures deemed us unworthy of staying? She wasn't done, Dee continued, delivering her performance like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Furthermore, she said dramatically, I've gathered evidence of hostility and repeated non-compliance. It's clear the Carters are no longer compatible with the standards and harmony of this neighborhood. Therefore, tonight, I'm proposing the board vote to force the sale of their property. I had to squeeze Amelia's hand to keep from standing up and yelling. The sheer audacity was infuriating, but when I glanced at my wife, she looked unbothered, almost like she was watching a rerun she already knew the ending to. That should have tipped me off. Calmly, Amelia rose and asked for permission to speak. She clutched a thick folder so full it looked like it could barely stay closed. I suddenly understood that she had been preparing for this exact moment for a very long time. "Before we consider removing anyone," she began, her voice ringing clear and strong, "perhaps we should take a look at who's truly been violating HOA rules." The room fell still. Her tone had that quiet authority I'd heard before, the same unwavering presence that once stopped D cold on our front porch. But now it filled the entire room. Her hand trembled for a brief second as she opened the folder. Then she found her rhythm. Amelia began laying out the case, methodically and with precision, like a trial lawyer delivering closing arguments. She covered the misappropriation of HOA funds, coercion of staff to falsify documents, misuse of legal resources for personal grudges, and multiple violations of state property oversight laws. She didn't just talk, she showed proof, one document at a time, laid carefully on the table like evidence in a courtroom. Budget spreadsheets, meeting logs, time-stamped photos. The room was silent as each piece landed, the weight of it growing heavier. Then Dee broke her silence, her voice cracking under the strain. "This is slander, lies and fabrication. None of this is real." Amelia didn't flinch. She turned her gaze toward the back of the room where Sophia had been sitting quietly, almost unnoticed until now. Sophia stood up slowly, and at that moment, the entire room felt deathly quiet. My ears were ringing. The silence was so sharp you could have heard the scrape of a shoelace. Every eye locked onto the woman who had stood by Dee's side for years, and now the one person who could either confirm Amelia's case or bring it all crashing down. Sophia looked at Amelia for a brief moment, silent, steady, and stronger than I'd ever seen her. Then, with a deep breath, she lifted her chin and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I can confirm that everything Mrs. Carter just presented is true," she said clearly. "For over a year, Mrs. Du Bois has forced me to conceal financial misconduct. She threatened my job and blacklisted me from future positions if I said a word." The room erupted like someone had set off a firework indoors. People were shouting questions. The board looked stunned. In Dee's face she cycled through rage, panic, disbelief, and denial all in the span of seconds. I actually felt a flicker of pity. But it passed. "You're lying," Dee shrieked, her composure unraveling. Her voice cracked, wild with the desperation of someone who suddenly realizes they're trapped. "This is all a setup. You've been conspiring against me from the beginning." But her voice didn't carry authority anymore. It sounded strained, frantic. Even her usual supporters were starting to waver. You could see it in their expressions, in uncertainty replacing loyalty. Then the board began speaking up, demanding to know why they'd never seen these financial irregularities. Residents who'd previously stayed silent suddenly found their courage and began sharing their own experiences, complaints ignored, strange citations, veiled threats. The room shifted into a chorus of pent-up frustration. "I was fined for building a birdhouse," someone shouted. "My kid's swing set was declared a hazard." Another voice called out. Years of tension burst loose like a dam breaking. The stories came one after another, overlapping. Some shouted, others barely whispered, but all damning. Even people who had walked in skeptical now leaned forward, riveted. Someone began recording on their phone. As for the infamous petition Dee had presented, half the people she claimed had signed it were now demanding to see their names, furious they'd been used without consent. Still, even as Dee's power crumbled, her support disintegrating around her, I saw something in Amelia's eyes that told me this wasn't over. Not yet. There was something more, something final that hadn't been revealed. Despite all the evidence, the testimonies, and Sophia's devastating confession, Dee refused to go down quietly. She lashed out with the energy of someone willing to burn the entire neighborhood down before admitting defeat. "You've all been plotting this behind my back," she cried, her voice now trembling with fury and fear. "This entire event is a trap." She looked around the room, searching for allies, trying to reclaim control. "Every decision I've made was for this community's safety. You're letting these people tear apart everything we've worked so hard to build." Her voice was rising again, almost pleading. She painted herself as the victim of a calculated smear campaign, begging the crowd to believe she was the true protector of the neighborhood. And for a terrifying second, I worried. Some people still looked unsure. Some board members exchanged uncertain glances. A few residents even nodded quietly, clinging to the idea that this might still be a misunderstanding. Then it happened. The door at the back of the room swung open with a bang loud enough to silence the chaos in an instant. Everyone turned. A woman in a dark suit entered with two sharply dressed men in tow, both carrying briefcases and expressions that meant business. She didn't walk like someone backing D up. She walked like someone here to deliver consequences. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her tone calm and unwavering as she stepped forward. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a leather badge wallet, holding it up under the bright fluorescent lights. But this couldn't wait. The room froze. "I'm Prosecutor Rachel Morgan from the County District Attorney's Office. Based on the results of an ongoing investigation into financial misconduct and abuse of authority, Mrs. Dolores Dubois is now under formal criminal investigation." The stillness that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt. You could have heard someone exhale across the room. I looked at Amelia. That quiet, knowing smile I'd seen on her face for weeks, and now I finally understood it. Rachel continued, removing a thick document from her bag covered in seals, stamps, and more legal authority than anything Dee had ever waved at a resident. "This is a court-issued warrant," she said, raising it for all to see, authorizing the immediate seizure of all HOA financial records and any personal devices belonging to Mrs. Dubois that were used for HOA business. She laid the warrant on the table like a hammer. "This isn't a neighborhood disagreement anymore," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This is a criminal matter." And then she added something that made the room collectively inhale. "This investigation began 3 months ago," she said, following a report from the county's building inspection office outlining patterns of misuse of authority and possible embezzlement within this HOA. 3 months ago, that's when it had all really started. It all started to make sense back when we first moved in, and Amelia began making all those hushed phone calls and flipping through legal codes like she was studying for the bar exam. I used to think she was just trying to get us out of these crosshairs. I had no idea she was quietly building a case that would bring the entire operation crashing down. While I was losing sleep over citations for garbage bins, she was logging every shady move. While I was spiraling over ominous whole letters, she was collecting evidence and coordinating with the county. Honestly, I felt both ridiculous and amazed, but mostly ridiculous. As Rachel, the prosecutor, continued reading from the findings, Dee stood frozen, completely paralyzed. The report laid it all out: financial misconduct, abuse of position, threats against employees, and outright violations of homeowners' rights and state housing regulations. The documentation had come straight from a seasoned county inspector who knew exactly what to look for. The picture was clear. This wasn't petty squabbling. This was systemic abuse. That's when it really hit me. Amelia hadn't just been reacting. She had been preparing for this from day one. Dee looked like someone who'd just realized the train she was on was headed off a cliff. Her last desperate words barely came out. "This is entrapment," she stammered. "They goaded me into a broken bar. These people hate our community standards." A broken bar. But even her own loyalists weren't nodding anymore. The victim act had run dry. Rachel's voice remained calm, professional, and utterly lethal. "Ma'am," she said evenly, "this investigation is based entirely on your own records of financial logs, emails, witness reports, meeting transcripts. Everything we've gathered originated from your own actions." The emphasis on your own was a dagger. There was no trap, no plot, just accountability arriving exactly on schedule. The very board members who'd once defended Dee were now staring at her like she'd stolen from their personal bank accounts. The 15 names on the petition she'd used to try and oust us, most of those people had never even heard of it, and several were demanding to know who had forged their signatures. It was like watching a sandcastle collapse in a rainstorm, fast, messy, and impossible to stop. Within minutes, Dee was officially suspended from all HOA activities. She handed over her laptop and phone with trembling hands. The warrant authorized the seizure of every document related to HOA operations. And the woman who once fined people for the color of their porch lights was now being treated like a white-collar criminal. The irony was delicious. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the deck of our modern lakeside cabin, hot coffee in hand, watching the sun spill across the water like nothing had ever threatened this peace. The investigation uncovered over $30,000 in misused funds, fabricated documents, and a disturbing pattern of using HOA resources to silence and punish dissenting homeowners. Temporary leadership had taken over and promised full transparency, plus a thorough audit of every financial decision moving forward. Amelia joined me outside, her mug steaming in the morning light. I finally asked the question that had been buzzing in my brain ever since the meeting blew up. "How long have you been planning this?" She just smiled at it quiet, knowing smile that now meant she'd been 5 moves ahead all along. "Daniel," she said, as soon as she handed us that first violation, "I recognize the behavioral pattern. People like D always go too far. You just have to document the damage and let them hang themselves." I blinked. "What about that legal document you showed her when she stormed over to inspect the cabin?" "That?" she said, grinning. "That was a legitimate statute reference, real enough to make her think twice about barging in, but it was also a test. I needed her to overreact, to give me cause to escalate it legally." It all clicked when D had shown up, screaming and rattling off policy, and then went completely silent after seeing the paper. It wasn't just about backing her off, it was the beginning of her unraveling. That moment became legend in our neighborhood. The day the HOA president stormed our property like a tyrant, only to leave in silence after Amelia showed her one piece of paper. Word spread, even nearby communities started reaching out, wanting to know how we'd done it. But the real takeaway wasn't about clever tricks or dramatic reveals. It was about patience. It was about trusting the process and knowing that justice doesn't always shout, it sometimes whispers until it has the power to roar. Our cabin still stands just as we built it, sleek, modern, bright steel and glass glinting in the sun. And no one's complaining about its design anymore. The new HOA board even issued a formal apology and said our home adds value and architectural character to the entire neighborhood. Sometimes I wonder, what if we had just caved and painted those window frames beige? Maybe we would have avoided all this chaos. But then again, sometimes the fight finds you. And when it does, standing your ground isn't just about you. It's about protecting everyone else that bully might have hurt next. Funny how a single document can start a domino effect that ends in justice. Amelia saw it all before I did. I was just the guy caught in the middle of the storm. But I'm glad we didn't back down. If this whole mess taught me anything, it's this: quiet persistence can crush even the loudest tyrant. If you've ever dealt with HOA horror or you're in one now, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you like tales like this, hit that subscribe button, maybe tap the thumbs up or drop a tip with the thanks button. No pressure, just gratitude. See you next time. Thanks for watching ya stories. More wild rides coming your way.